There are places in the world that people stop talking about, not because they are forgotten, but because remembering them brings back questions that have no answers. Deep in the northern countryside, far away from crowded cities and modern roads, there was an abandoned railway station known as Black Hollow Station. For decades, no train had stopped there. The tracks were covered with rust. The old wooden platform was falling apart. The station clock had stopped at exactly midnight, and the people of the nearby village avoided the place after sunset because they believed that every night at 12, a train arrived, a train that was not supposed to exist. The story began with a young journalist named Daniel Carter. Daniel was known for investigating forgotten stories. While other journalists chased famous events and political scandals, Daniel searched for mysteries hidden in old newspapers and forgotten archives. He believed that every strange story had a truth waiting to be discovered. One cold evening, while working late in the newspaper office, Daniel found an old article buried inside a collection of forgotten reports. The headline immediately caught his attention. Passenger train disappears without a trace. 1954 mystery remains unsolved. Daniel read the article carefully. According to the report, a passenger train called the Midnight Express had disappeared on a winter night 70 years earlier. The train was carrying 23 passengers and 4 railway workers. It left the city station at 11:30 p.m. It was expected to arrive at Black Hollow Station shortly after midnight, but it never arrived. The train vanished. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies. No explanation. The investigation was closed after several years. The official conclusion: unknown disappearance. But some people believed something else. They believed the train never crashed. They believed it was still traveling. Daniel became fascinated by the mystery. He traveled to Black Hollow Village to investigate. When he arrived, the locals were not happy to see him. The old villagers became silent when he mentioned the station. One elderly man named Samuel Reed warned him, "Some places are abandoned for a reason." Daniel smiled. "I'm only looking for a story." The old man looked toward the dark forest. "No, young man," he whispered. "You're looking for something that does not want to be found." That night, Daniel walked toward Black Hollow Station. The path was covered with fallen leaves. The wind moved through the trees. The old railway signs were broken and covered with moss. When he reached the platform, he saw the abandoned station exactly as the stories described. A place frozen in time. The old clock above the platform still showed 12. Daniel checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. He turned on his recording device. Black Hollow Station. First night of investigation. No signs of activity. He stopped speaking because he heard something. A sound from the darkness. A distant sound. A sound that had not been heard there for 70 years. A train whistle. Daniel froze. The tracks ahead were empty, but the sound became louder. The ground began to shake slightly. A cold fog moved across the platform. And then, out of the darkness, a train appeared. An old black passenger train covered in mist. Its lights flickered. Its metal wheels moved silently over the rails. But something was wrong. There was no driver, no railway worker, no sound of a modern engine, only silence. The train slowly stopped beside the platform. The door opened, and warm yellow light spilled onto the empty station. Daniel stood completely still. Every instinct told him to run, but curiosity was stronger. He looked inside the train. Passengers were sitting quietly. Men wearing old-fashioned suits, women wearing clothing from another era, children looking through the windows. Everyone appeared normal, except for one thing. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was moving. They were all staring at him. A conductor stepped forward. He wore an old railway uniform. His face was pale. His eyes were tired. He looked at Daniel and said, "Your ticket, please?" Daniel stared at him. "I don't have a ticket." The conductor looked at him strangely. Then he smiled. "Nobody does." A cold feeling passed through Daniel. What does that mean? The conductor stepped aside. Everyone who boards this train is searching for something. He looked into Daniel's eyes. Are you searching for the truth? Daniel could not answer, because written on the conductor's badge were 2 words: Thomas Miller. The same name appeared in the newspaper article, "The conductor of the missing train." Daniel stepped onto the train. The moment his foot touched the floor, the station disappeared. The doors closed, and the Midnight Express began moving. Inside the carriage, Daniel looked at the passengers. Then he noticed something impossible. Every passenger had a small name card attached to their seat. He walked closer. The first name, Emily Johnson, missing 1954. The second, Robert Hayes, missing 1954. The third, William Parker, missing 1954. Daniel's hands began shaking. These were not fictional names. They were the names of the passengers who vanished 70 years ago. Then one passenger slowly turned toward him, an old woman with silver hair. She looked at Daniel with sadness. "You finally came." Daniel stepped back. "What do you mean?" The woman looked out the window. "The train has been waiting for someone to tell our story." The lights inside the carriage began flickering. The train entered a dark tunnel, and as darkness surrounded them, the old woman whispered, "But once you enter the Midnight Express, you may never leave." The sound of the train moving through the darkness filled the empty carriage. Slowly, quietly, like a heartbeat from another world. Daniel Carter sat frozen in his seat, unable to understand what was happening. Outside the window, there was no landscape, no villages, no forests, no lights, only endless darkness. It felt as if the train was no longer traveling through the countryside. It was traveling somewhere else, somewhere beyond time. Daniel looked again at the passengers. They sat silently in their seats, exactly as they had been 70 years ago. A man reading an old newspaper, a woman holding a small suitcase, a child looking out of the window. They were not ghosts like the stories described. They looked completely human, but something about them felt wrong. They were people trapped in a moment that should have ended decades ago. Daniel approached the old woman who had spoken to him. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman looked at him. "My name is Eleanor Blake." Daniel searched his memory. He had seen that name before. In the newspaper article, "You're one of the missing passengers." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes." His voice became quieter. "You disappeared in 1954. A sad smile appeared on her face. "That is what the world believes." Daniel sat across from her. "Then what really happened?" Eleanor looked toward the front of the train. "The answer begins on the night we boarded this train. The last journey of the Midnight Express. December 17th, 1954. The Midnight Express was a normal passenger train. It carried workers returning home, families visiting relatives, travelers searching for a new beginning. Nobody knew that it would become a legend. Nobody knew it would become a train without a destination. At 11:30 p.m., the train left the city station. The weather was terrible. A heavy snowstorm covered the railway. The final stop was Black Hollow Station. But as the train approached the station, something happened. The passengers remembered seeing a strange light ahead on the tracks, a bright white glow. The conductor, Thomas Miller, tried to slow the train, but the controls stopped responding. The train entered a thick wall of fog. And for a few moments, everything disappeared. Sound, light, time. When the passengers opened their eyes again, the train was still moving, but the world outside was gone. "At first, we thought we had been traveling for hours," Eleanor explained. "But then we noticed something." Daniel leaned closer. "What?" "The clocks stopped." She pointed toward the carriage clock. It showed 12 a.m., the same time it had shown every night since. Daniel walked through the train, searching for answers. Each carriage contained more secrets. In the second carriage, he found luggage, old suitcases, newspapers from 1954, letters that were never delivered, photographs of families waiting for people who would never return. Then he found something strange. A newspaper clipping. The headline read, "27 years later, the midnight train still missing." Daniel looked confused. 27 years? He checked the date. 1981. The article claimed that witnesses had reported seeing the train years after it disappeared. But how? The train vanished in 1954. Daniel returned to Eleanor. "The train has appeared before." She nodded. "Many times." "Why?" The old woman looked at him. "Because the train is searching." "Searching for what?" She whispered. "Someone who can finally end the journey." A sudden noise interrupted them. The train lights flickered. Everyone became silent. The passengers looked toward the end of the carriage. Someone was coming. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. A man appeared from the darkness. The conductor, Thomas Miller. But now Daniel noticed something he had not seen before. The conductor looked exhausted, almost afraid. Daniel Carter. The conductor spoke his name. Daniel stood up. "How do you know who I am?" Thomas looked at the passengers. "They have been waiting for you." Daniel frowned. "Why me?" The conductor handed him an old envelope. "Because your grandfather was on this train." The world seemed to stop. Daniel stared at him. "My grandfather?" Thomas nodded. "James Carter." Daniel knew the name. His grandfather had disappeared before he was born. His family always said he had left and never returned, but nobody knew the truth. He was a passenger? Thomas looked at the darkness outside the window. Not just a passenger. He was the reason this train never reached its destination. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written 70 years earlier. The handwriting was familiar. It belonged to his grandfather. The first words were, "If someone from my family finds this letter, it means the train has finally chosen another traveler." Daniel continued reading. The letter revealed a shocking secret. His grandfather had discovered that the train was not carrying passengers through space. It was carrying them through memories. Every person on the train was trapped by something unfinished. A promise, a regret, a secret. Daniel looked around. The passengers were not waiting to escape. They were waiting to be remembered. The train was not a prison. It was a place between the past and the present, a place where lost souls waited for closure. Suddenly, the train slowed. Outside the window, a station appeared. Daniel looked carefully. A sign stood beside the platform. Black Hollow Station. But it looked different. New. Alive. Then he realized something terrifying. The station was not abandoned anymore. It was exactly as it looked in 1954. The train doors opened. Thomas Miller looked at Daniel. "Your journey begins now." Daniel stepped toward the door. But before leaving, he asked, "What happens if I don't come back?" The conductor looked at him sadly. "Then the train will continue searching until someone else hears the whistle." Daniel stepped onto the platform. The moment his feet touched the ground, the train vanished, leaving behind only fog and one question: what really happened to his grandfather? The moment Daniel Carter stepped onto the platform, everything changed. The cold night air disappeared. The abandoned station was gone. The broken wooden benches, the rusted signs, and the old forgotten tracks had transformed into something completely different. Black Hollow Station was alive again. The year was no longer the present. It was 1954. The station was filled with people, travelers carrying suitcases, families saying goodbye, workers moving along the platform. The sound of voices filled the air, but nobody noticed Daniel. He was standing in a world that had disappeared 70 years ago. Daniel looked around in disbelief. This isn't possible. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Daniel." He turned around. Standing behind him was a man he had only seen in old family photographs. An older man with kind eyes and a tired expression. His grandfather, James Carter. For a moment, Daniel could not speak. All his life, he had believed his grandfather had simply vanished, but now he was standing in front of him, alive. "Grandfather?" James looked at him sadly. "I knew one day someone from our family would find the train." Daniel stepped closer. "Everyone said you disappeared." James lowered his eyes. "That is because I did." "But why?" The old man looked toward the railway tracks. "Because some journeys cannot end until the truth is revealed." The secret of the Midnight Express. James explained what really happened on that night in 1954. The Midnight Express was carrying ordinary passengers, but among them was a man named Victor Hale. Victor was a powerful businessman who had discovered something dangerous. He had evidence that several important people were involved in a massive crime. A crime involving stolen money, corruption, and innocent people who had been blamed. Victor planned to reveal everything when the train arrived at Black Hollow Station. But someone wanted that secret buried forever. The night of the disappearance was not an accident. The train was sabotaged. Someone had changed the railway signals, sending the train toward an unfinished section of track. The passengers were supposed to die. The evidence was supposed to disappear. But something unexpected happened. The train entered the mysterious fog, and instead of crashing, it crossed into a place between moments, a place where unfinished stories remain. The train saved us, James explained, but it also trapped us. Daniel looked at the station around him. Why couldn't you leave? James looked toward the train. Because nobody on that train had accepted the truth. The final passenger. Daniel finally understood. The passengers were not trapped because of the accident. They were trapped because every person carried something unfinished. Eleanor Blake had lost her husband and never said goodbye. Thomas Miller, the conductor, blamed himself for the disappearance. Others carried regrets they never faced. And James Carter. James had carried a secret. What was your secret? Daniel asked. His grandfather became silent. Then he answered, I knew who caused the accident. Daniel's eyes widened. Who? James looked toward the station entrance. He was on the train with us. A cold wind moved through the station. The lights began flickering. The Midnight Express appeared again in the distance. The whistle echoed through the night. Daniel looked at his grandfather. What happens now? James smiled. Now the truth must finally return. The man behind the disaster. Back on the train, Daniel followed his grandfather into the first carriage. There was one passenger sitting alone, an elderly man wearing an expensive black coat. Daniel recognized him immediately, Victor Hale, the man who caused the tragedy. But something was different. He looked afraid. You know who I am, Victor said. Daniel nodded. You destroyed this train. Victor looked down. I made one terrible choice. You killed 27 people. The old man closed his eyes. I know. Victor explained that he had not expected the train to survive. He believed everyone would die. He believed the truth would disappear. But when the train became trapped between worlds, he was forced to live with what he had done. For 70 years, every night, every midnight, the train returned, waiting for someone to reveal the truth. Daniel looked at the passengers. They were finally free. The train began to shake. The clock above the door moved. For the first time in 70 years, the hands began to turn. 12:01. 12:02. Time was moving again. The passengers slowly disappeared. Not like ghosts, but like people finally finding peace. Eleanor smiled at Daniel. Thank you for remembering us. Thomas Miller removed his conductor hat. My final journey is complete. and James Carter walked toward his grandson. "I am sorry I couldn't come home." Daniel tried to hold him, but his grandfather was already fading. "You gave us what we needed." "What was that?" James smiled. "The truth." The last whistle. The train began moving. Daniel jumped toward the door, but James stopped him. "No." Daniel looked confused. "You have to leave." "But you," his grandfather smiled. "Some people belong to the past." The doors closed. The Midnight Express disappeared into the fog. And Daniel woke up the next morning beside the old Black Hollow station. The village found him unconscious near the tracks. When he told them what happened, nobody believed him. Nobody. Except one person. Samuel Reed, the old villager who had warned him. Because when Daniel showed him the old letter from his grandfather, Samuel started crying. "I thought I would never see proof." Months later, Daniel published the story. The world finally learned about the Midnight Express. The names of the lost passengers were remembered. The truth about the accident was revealed, and Black Hollow Station became a place where people came to honor those who disappeared. But some villagers still claim that on quiet nights, when the moon is full, a whistle can be heard from the old railway tracks. And if you stand there at exactly midnight, you may see an old black train appear from the mist, waiting, watching, searching for the next person who needs to uncover a forgotten truth. Because some journeys do not end when a train stops. Some journeys continue until the story is finally told.